But one of the calm and collected voices through Saturday and Sunday was Tina Fordham, founder and geopolitical strategist at Fordham Global Foresight, giving perspective, but perspective not off speculation and rumors, perspective off the news. Tina Fordham, when you look at the news flow that we have, what captures your attention this morning?
In some ways, Tom, I'm looking at what isn't happening or what hasn't happened, the counterfactual. I'm almost waiting for Russian TV to start playing Swan Lake, which they have a habit of doing when times get difficult. There is a real air of caution and pause that's prevailing, whether that's Secretary of State Blinken's comments, which were quite measured, as you just played, whether or not the tape of Defense Minister Shoigu is recent or not. We haven't seen Putin. As Lisa said, Prigozhin, is it a deal? Is it not a deal? We shouldn't assume that these are coordinated actions. And I think that's really important.
Right.
Market participants tend to look for data points, forming a trend line, and we don't have that yet.
Tina, when I give speeches on this and on the humility of being totally wrong, my great Tina Fordham moment was I was totally wrong on Boris Yeltsin. The way that Boris Yeltsin collapsed, are there allusions to that with Mr. Putin in the coming months?
Well, absolutely. And this is where I think political science is helpful. Authoritarian regimes can consolidate around an individual, as Putin has done over the past 23 years. They can shut down all forms of dissent. But that means that they tend to be brittle and to break rather than bend. This script, Prigozhin has gone off the reservation with his remarks, which have blown holes through all of the narratives that the West has been fed, that Russia was forced to invade because of NATO expansion, because of violation of human rights of Russian speakers, etc. No, Prigozhin said this is because they ran out of stuff to loot in Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk.
But Tina, that's exactly where I wanted to go. Why didn't Vladimir Putin shut him down months ago when he started to release these types of commentary out there? Do we have a sense of why Prigozhin was allowed to have a voice that very few people in Russia have been allowed to have about this war?
There are two possible explanations, and they can both coexist. One is that Putin needs him, that Prigozhin provides services which Putin still values, which would also explain why he hasn't had any polonium tea just yet in exile in Belarus. And the other is, we have really overcredited Putin, as we tend to do with other kind of opaque regimes, with, controlling all the strings and playing three-dimensional chess. It is a rookie mistake, a violation of authoritarianism 101 to support competing armed militias. But Putin has always specialized in KGB-style divide and conquer. So having these competing power centers like the Defense Ministry and Wagner and their other militias as well, has suited him, because then these guys fight each other. It's the bulldogs under a rug, as Churchill said, rather than posing a threat to him.
There's a real question here about China's response to a potential loss of Vladimir Putin's power. And this has been evident over the weekend meetings. What are you watching there in terms of what China would like to see and how they are interceding into any negotiations with Belarus, with Vladimir Putin, or just staying out of it?
China will not want to intervene, but for sure they are sweating. Ever since President Xi's remarks of a friendship without limits, I think that there was buyer's remorse pretty soon after that happened. Remember, that was early February, and the invasion happened thereafter. Let's look for statements coming from officials. They've been very modest so far, talking about internal domestic disturbances. But as much as Putin has caused global disruption, which is something that China doesn't like. I think whether we're talking about Washington or Beijing, there's enormous concern of who would replace him. And I had this moment of terror as Prigozhin was getting closer to the Kremlin, and I thought, what if he actually goes for it and there's a palace coup? And I won't be the only one who thought about that.
Tina, and this is your wheelhouse. I'm absolutely fascinated what the intelligentsia, that's a fancy word, Lisa. I don't really know how to pronounce it.
Intelligentsia.
Amy had to help me with that. Intelligentsia, or the elites, or the oligarchs, the fancy people in Russia and outside Russia. Can they shape the events in Moscow and St. Petersburg?
I suspect that they're finding out just how little political capital they have. I mean, again, we assume that these are sort of closed systems that are controlled from the top, and they are much more chaotic than we realize. One of the things that political science talks about is negative loyalty. That means nobody piped up and said a word in defense of Putin, which you might have expected if he still was a going proposition in terms of a power source. What do kleptocrats do in a situation like this? Figure out how to keep as much of their stuff as possible. That's what will be happening now.
Tina, thank you so much for the brief. Tina Fordham, we're really providing leadership coverage over the weekend in the zeitgeist, if you will, with Fordham Global Foresight. I was thunderstruck of, this big international events like we've had other ones, including February, a year and a bit ago when the war started. But wow, how Twitter has changed. I was bedazzled by what I observed in my lousy feed this weekend. I was looking for Red Sox baseball, and it wasn't there.
There's a fascination right now over a drama that is so uncertain. And reading all of the newspapers over the weekend, regardless of Twitter, the newspapers don't have a clue either. And I think that what Tina just said there was really telling. What we don't know possibly tells us more than what we know in terms of the lack of visibility on Vladimir Putin, the lack of visibility on the two generals that helm his particular troops, the lack of understanding of what the agreement is, all of these questions around motivation, which is still unclear, and the goals. That, to me, remains the biggest, most interesting aspect over the weekend.
To aggregate this for you, our Bloomberg big take this morning centers on Mr. Putin facing historic threat